Welcome back to our newest podcast. We've been out for a bit. Dennis, something happened to you. What happened? You disappeared off the face of the earth?
Which earth?
It might have been worse than I thought.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, at the beginning of March, I was cleaning someone's garage for them. And apparently it has been something they've never done in the 20-something years they've been here.
Ooh.
So when I started moving things, a box fell. And from behind that box came a cloud of dust. And from that cloud of dust, I could see, rodent feces. There were bottles of ammonia and other cleaning solutions that had crystallized and sunk into the concrete. So I know I inhaled a bunch of crystallized ammonia and bleach dust. So the day after that, I was literally in bed for 3 days straight. Couldn't breathe. My sat O2 went down to probably I was like 103 years old. And
Wow.
yeah, it's taken me a couple of weeks. Because like last week or the week before, see, even now I can't talk for very long without starting to cough. So other than that, everything's great.
Great. Well, yeah, the month of March is my birth month. And so of course I've been keeping from getting sick for the most part. And I did pretty well, but there was a lot of stress and everything. Not only did my mother-in-law become hospitalized, then my mother just a couple weeks ago. We found her in a pool of blood. She had fallen and hit her head, fallen straight back. And so it was kind of one thing after the other. And then I had a cold and, yeah. So we're like, we really don't want to pause too long on our podcast, but sometimes you do need to take care of your own health. But at least people had 4 to listen to. And so today we have exciting event, exciting news, because we have the legendary JKD. What shall I say? Legend? He's a legendary legend. Christopher Kent. And we are. It's been a while. It's been a while since we've seen him. I don't know when the last time you saw him.
Gosh, it's been decades, literally.
It has, I think, in person at least, right?
Yeah.
But we're welcoming Chris Kent. Chris, come on and go ahead and activate your camera for those that watch this on YouTube. There you are.
All right, are we activated?
There it is. Yes. Do you remember? See, I shouldn't put this on you, but do you remember the last time we saw each other? I remember way back when we were doing photos for the new release of the Jun Fan Jeet Kune Do textbook and kickboxing.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, that I think that might have been the last one because that was after we did things at Cass's, and sometimes you guys and Tim would come to Cass's, but that's been a long time. So I quite honestly think that it is when we came down and did the reshoot for the book. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking, I know that there was different Bruce Lee Foundation events and things like that, but every once in a while I had to miss them and you had to miss them, and I don't remember.
No, that all sort of went out the window in 2002, I think. So
Oh my
it was
gosh.
after that. Yeah, I know, when you think about it, right? And so it was after that, but I do believe that it was when we did the reshoot for the books.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna hold up I have my original Jun Fan Jeet Kune Do, Jeet Kune Do kickboxing by yourself, your great self, and Tim Tackett. I have the original copy, not the one that I'm in the photos, or but and then of course the Jun Fan Jeet Kune Do textbook, and that is the book that it was so cool that you and Tim Tackett put your name and address and phone number in the cover, because I was visiting from Virginia, and my dad calls me and says, "Hey, do you want, your book?" I'd ordered the book from like Inside Kung Fu magazine or something. It shows back up in Virginia, and my dad says, "You want to wait till you get back?" Which was like 2 or 3 more weeks. And I said, no, send it. So he sends it to me here in California. And then I'm in Mentone, which is 5 feet from Redlands.
Right.
Right.
And I found, and I'm like, well, one of these addresses is in Redlands. So we, you were by chance you were lucky enough that I didn't happen upon your phone number and address. Tacky got stuck with me, but I mean, I literally moved here. I was like, Dad, I found Jeet Kune Do. I'm staying in
Yeah.
California, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that was the
You're one of a number of people that did that, over the years. So,
yeah.
yeah.
It, it's called dedication. Now,
Yeah.
I'm sure Dennis has his own questions. I was going to ask you, since we were talking about the Bruce Lee Foundation. I know you were a big part of the nucleus,
Hmm.
and were you still working with the when they changed the name to the Bruce Lee Foundation? Um,
Yes, that was right. Um, Actually, I think it was just after I resigned because uh, I led my I it was in Holland that I read John Little's letter of resignation
mhm.
from the foundation, and then followed that immediately by I have to read another one, and I read mine. Um, so I think it was either just prior to that, because there was a lot of machinations going on at the time and who was going to do what, and so it was right around that time though, because it was originally, yeah, it was originally called the Bruce Lee Educational Foundation,
Right.
and then I think I think it's right after I left, because I did receive a letter about they were revamping it and it was going to be called the Bruce Lee Foundation from that time on. So
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, I the nucleus, what was happening back in those days, those were fond memories for me because I was still quite new. Um, I had been around for a few years, but the downside was I was also quite young, so I didn't have any money. So it was cool that they were being, they were taking place in different countries and different states, but
Right,
if I
right,
couldn't get a ride with somebody, sometimes I had to miss out.
right.
But I was in San Francisco and a few others there, and then
Yeah, well, again, the idea that came to fruition from the initial meeting in Seattle was that, we would have an event in each of the locations that Bruce had a school. So
Yep.
the first one being San Francisco, was the first one no, first one was Seattle.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, and then San Francisco and Los Angeles and things like
yes,
that. So yeah, that's how
which
it was done that way.
yeah,
But
it makes sense. Yeah, I think I missed Seattle, and then I got to go to San Francisco and then
mm,
L.A., which was
So
yeah,
were you at the last one in Torrance?
yeah, the last one was in Torrance.
Okay.
Yeah.
so. Were you there, Dennis?
Yes.
Oh, so maybe we saw. I don't know if that was after or before the photo shoot. Yeah, 'cause I'm getting old now, and
Well,
dates
again,
just
that would have to be around 2000, 2001. So
okay.
maybe if you've got the new book, see when it was published, and that'll give you a good idea. So yeah.
Uh, so, and I know you've got a lot of new, fresh things to talk about. I just wanted to quickly
Mhm.
go. I'm sure everybody that's listening knows who you are and at least some of your history, but um, I wanted you, if you don't mind, to quickly just go over how you got introduced to Jeet Kune Do and what your path was from the early days.
Sure. No, I don't mind, as I said, because I do recognize that, you know, as time passes, we have a whole new audience each time,
Mhm.
and some of those people haven't been privy to that. So no, I don't mind. Again, as I said, I was living in Santa Monica, California. My martial art journey began when I began studying judo and jujitsu at the Santa Monica YMCA, because they had you could join the YMCA at that time. So I'm telling you how old it was. It was $20 a year to be a member, and you could do everything there, the weights, everything. So I was training there, and I did some other things and went back to England. And like when I came back to the US, I began training in Five Animal Kung Fu System in Los Angeles under Grandmaster Wong in downtown LA, because it was like cool, and it was, Chinese kung fu. And
Mhm.
but I read two articles the one that was written by Bruce Lee that everybody knows, Liberate Yourself from Classical Karate. And then the second one was one that Dan Inosanto had written for Karate Illustrated. Jeet Kune Do is fast, powerful, and deceptive. And I read both of those articles because I would go and buy the magazines, and there was just something struck a resonant chord in it with me. So I contacted Black Belt Magazine, and because, like I said, you used to be able to go out there in Culver City and buy the magazines. Said I was really interested in Jeet Kune Do. How could I find out about it? And they told me, well, Bruce Lee's in Hong Kong making the movies. The only person teaching is Dan Inosanto, who teaches in his backyard in Carson, California. So I said, can I have his phone number? And they said, no, but actually it's in the telephone book. Looked it up. Sure enough, there's Dan Inosanto's name. So called him first, probably month or so. I didn't get to talk to him because he was a teacher, the junior high school teacher, and then he was teaching, the JKD. So I spoke to his wife, his first wife, Sue Inosanto, a couple of times, and it was always call back, call back. So I would call back, and then I finally spoke to Dan himself, and he informed me, well, I only teach 12 people in my backyard at a time. I might be starting another class. And then he would say, well, call me back in a week. So I would make a note of it in my journal, and a week to the day I would call back. And there was a couple that went on for a couple of times. And then eventually I called back, and I was talking with him, and then he just paused, and just said, well, I tell you what, why don't you come down and talk to me tomorrow? So next day after work, jumped on the San Diego freeway, and you guys are from California, so you know what the San Diego freeway is like, and
Yeah.
it was easier then, but it was still busy. Drove down, met Dan, watched the class that was going on at the time, and at that time I'm not sure if he was there, but Tim was already a student there. Sat there, and Dan asked me all kinds of questions about my background and what I like to do and things like that. And then at the end of the conversation, and that was about an hour and a half while the class was going on, so he would jump up and go and teach and then come back. At the end, he just said, "Okay, do you want to start working out?" So I said, "Yeah," And as I said, even to this day, I can still remember the feeling. I still get the same feeling when I got in my car to drive home, knowing that I've been accepted into this backyard school, and I was just like, yeah, all right. So went and bought the gear, went and bought the baseball shin guards, the blue and orange ones, mouthpiece, and boxing gloves, and then began training. So that was I think June 3rd, 1973.
You were quite young.
Yeah, I was 17 and a half,
Oh.
17 and three quarters, whatever it was, something like that. Yeah. I think everybody there, with the exception of Hedi Lakai, but he was probably at least still 10 years older than me. But everybody in that class was at least 20 years older than me. So
Oh. Funny that you mentioned that feeling, because I was just thinking about that while you were talking. When I showed up to the garage, first I called Tim Tackett, and I was like nervous, but there was, and then he said, I said, I was expecting hundreds of dollars a month. I think he charged $30 a month at the time for
Yeah.
for 4 Wednesdays or whatever per month. And I was just, and I remember every time I drove to the Wednesday night class or whatever, I'd just be so excited. It's like I always wondered, do people still get that feeling? And JKD was so special.
yeah. Again, I don't know, but you had it. I had it, and yeah, but it's a very personal thing, as you said, and you wish everybody. I've always said that I wish everybody could experience that sort of feeling, because it was just so cool. I don't know all the modern vernacular, so I just use the vernacular of my time, and yeah, it was just cool, man. That's what you thought.
Yeah,
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
And you were
When
dedicated.
hey,
That's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Chris, when did you guys go from Dan's backyard over to the academy?
That was, I believe, April 1974.
Okay.
Um, you know, it's like Bruce passed away 6 weeks after I started training. And again, there's certain things you remember in your life, as we all do.
Mhm.
Waking up and I was living with my parents and my father telling me, "Oh, Bruce Lee died." And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And no, no, turn on the news. And so I did. And then I immediately called Dan, and he was absolutely devastated.
Mm.
Absolutely devastated, and wasn't even sure that he wanted to continue. You know, was thinking about closing the backyard gym down, and I believe it was a combination of Richard Bustillo and Daniel Lee talking to him, and then he got a note from Steve McQueen, and he used to have it down at the. If you remember the old Collie Academy, when you walked in, there was that little office right in the front there, and
Right.
he had these things permaplacked, as they called it, and he had a note from McQueen, and it said. Bruce did his own thing. I'm sure he would want you to do your own thing. You're a good man, you know, Steve.
Wow.
So I think it was a combination. I believe it was a combination of Richard and Daniel Lee telling him, because a lot of people don't realize that the Filipino Collie Academy. That's why it was called that. Was there were first there was no words Jeet Kune Do on the outside. Eventually they did have a sign put up, but it was originally primarily so that Dan and Richard could continue their investigations into the Filipino martial arts, and then we would have the JKD class, as it was known, and then they decided to put in these phase classes, phase one, phase two, phase three. Um, and that's how that was structured. Again, Dan being a PE teacher, I remember when we opened the school, he said, we're gonna structure this like going to college, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, but we're gonna call them phase one, two, three, four, and then people that went through those phases would then their name could be put forth to be voted into the JKD class,
Hmm.
and that went on for a period of time, and then it changed.
That's interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So as I said, Tim, Tim is my senior. Tim was already there, had already been training when I came on board. So
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah. What a horrible shock though to think you're probably expecting to meet Bruce Lee and then he passes away and
yeah. I actually have a beef to pick with Bruce, and I said when I meet him in the afterlife, and I'm gonna pick, he'll probably kick my ass, but and that was the fact that uh, Dan's birthday is July 24th. And Bruce was supposed to be coming over to the US to promote Enter the Dragon and do do the Johnny Carson show, those kind of shows back then. So we were going to plan a surprise birthday party picnic for Dan, and supposedly, again, I have no guarantees, but supposedly, Bruce would turn up and surprise him,
Mm.
and then he died 4 days before. So that's my beef with Bruce Lee, you know, you son of a gun.
oh
So
man.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah.
So it's the Filipino martial arts I've always loved. I
Mhm.
learned a little from Tim, mostly from Dennis,
Mhm.
who was from the Kali Academy and everything,
Mhm.
right? And but I do remember before it was funny because when I got the books and everything, and I saw yours and Tim Tackett's name, I actually only knew who you were, Chris,
Mhm.
because I had and I still have the magazine. I think it was late 89 or maybe early 1990, but I bought it was a Bruce Lee special edition, maybe by Inside Kung Fu, or it could have been
Mhm.
Black Belt. And you had an article called the JKD Kali Connection.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you remember
yeah.
writing that? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have the magazine. Yeah.
yeah. And so I think I still have this, have it. And so I don't always remember names very well. I'm one of those people that like never forgets a face, but but it takes me a few times to get a
Mhm.
name, or have to put special effort into it. Anyway. But when I saw the name on the book, I was like, oh, okay, this is Chris Kent. And so, but Tim was in the area, so
Right,
that was by
right.
default. And of course, I got to be part of the Wednesday night group and everything.
Mhm.
But I was actually quite excited to come when we were doing the photo shoots and got to come meet you and everything too, because I had already been reading articles by you and seen you in the old pictures and everything, at the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Inosanto Academy and things like that.
Yeah.
And everybody knew you but me, as a dentist. Says, oh, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like you said, it's been a long journey, a long path. So, and a great one, yeah, an amazing one. So,
Yeah, so so we kind of left off. He had the Kali Academy,
mhm.
and you continued to train there with him until when?
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact time because what happened was he opened. I wrote a little blog about it once. I call it the unknown um, school, the unknown JKD school. And the Inosanto Academy was still going, but Dan opened a small school in Culver City on West Washington Boulevard up per Sepulveda. And he opened it in conjunction with Hawkins Chung, who he'd become very good friends with. So Hawkins would teach on whatever, Monday, Wednesday nights, and then Dan would teach on Tuesday, Thursday nights. So then Dan was teaching both at the Filipino Kali Academy in Torrance and this Culver City school at the same time. So Culver City, I was only about 10 minutes away from that, kind of like you with Tim. So I still went to the Kali Academy on Saturdays and a few times during the week or whatever. But I was assisting Dan in Culver City now, at that school, and uh, then they opened the IMB Academy,
Hmm.
um, which again at that time stood for Inosanto, Martinez, and Bastillo. Right. Later on, it was changed to International Martial Arts and Boxing, but initially it was that. So Dan was at both of those schools, and I didn't go to the IMB as much. It was in a different location, it was further down.
Hmm.
So I was just more affiliated with Dan there. And then he eventually opened the first school in Marina Del Rey, on Del Rey Avenue. So, and again, that was close to where I lived at home. So I would just drive there and assist there. Uh, for a while, like I said, I was still at two places because we had the Saturday group down in Torrance, and things like that. But I began to move more of my time with Dan to Marina Del Rey. Yeah.
Did you
So.
ever see Brandon?
Oh yeah, yeah. I knew Brandon since he was 9 years old. First time I met him was through I don't know, first time I met him and first time I met Linda. I think I'd met Linda before once or twice, but um, was through Gilbert Johnson, who put the Tao of Jeet Kune Do together. And
Ah,
because he was writing for Black Belt, and Linda had come back. This was about a year after Bruce passed away. She had come back. I think she was in Seattle, but she moved to Santa Monica, and she was about 7 streets from where I lived. And Gil was a good friend of mine through the book and training in the JKD class. So I went around and I met her and I met Brandon, and he was, I think, 9. Yeah, he was about 9 the first time. And so then I saw him at numerous stages of his development growing up. And the last time I saw him was I had lunch with him a couple of times while he was making Rapid Fire. I
ah.
went out. I went out on location and had lunch, and then that's when he had to show me he had just bought one of those new Acura NSXs cars that looks like a little mini Ferrari.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So
Oh
he's like,
wow,
oh yeah, and it was a black one. And it was because I got to show you my new car, and yeah, just had some nice chats with him. Yeah,
that's
It
so
was-
cool.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I really liked Rapid Fire in the sense that it looked like they tried to put actual some JKD in it.
yeah. He did. He was very much into doing that, and finding his own way, and yet still, obviously, the genetic component is there. And I saw that he had his old man's temper. I know
Mm.
that. I saw that. Um, I saw it when he was 9 years old, first time I met him, you know, just funny as heck. But um, but he did, and he strove to be himself at the same time. While he respected his father very, very much, and loved everything. He was his own person, and I admired that about him very much. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
So let's see. You said you recognize he had the temper at 9. Was anything specific?
Yeah, yeah. Um, First time like I said, I walked into the house when I met him. He threw a tennis ball at me from across the room. Just and I caught it in my hand. So it was kind of like, oh, okay. But yeah, we were going to go down to the beach, and uh, Shannon was only 5, and they had a housekeeper or friend was there, and Linda told Shannon that told Shannon that she couldn't go, and so she sort of got very upset over it. And so at that time, Linda said, "Well, I think what we'll do is we'll do it another time." And so it was like, okay. And so she was sitting on the arm of one of those big, like Queen Anne chairs, big, chair with the high back or whatever. And Brandon got out and walked over the room, and he just stopped and looked at her and said, "I hope you're happy now," and just shoved her, into the chair, but and then just walked out. But he just had this cold look on his face. He was just like, "Well, I hope you're happy now." Boom, like that. So yeah. Um,
Siblings.
yeah, I didn't know him. I didn't see him when he was training at the Marina School, and like I said, I saw him grow up. I saw him. He went to a Chinese school. He and Shannon went to a Chinese school on Saturdays down in Palos Verdes, and we went and did a demonstration for the school that he was doing on, and then went and had tea up at the house, and uh, you know,
Hmm.
so just
So you didn't actually see him doing the training, but
no.
he
No.
wasn't into it early on though, right? He wasn't really wanting to go down that path as a child.
No, it was very emotional for him. I did, like I said, I met him when he was 9. I ended up teaching him a private lesson. I don't know how old he was, maybe 10 or 11, at the Collie Academy, because Dan couldn't do it one time. But uh, again, this I learned from Linda, was that it was very emotional for him at the beginning, because his father was just such a strong force in his life that I think it was just too close to him. But eventually, he again he became more involved in it, and yeah, then got into it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Dennis, did you ever see him at the academy when I'm
Yeah,
trying to put the time frames together?
yeah. But he was there mostly the times I saw him. He was there mostly probably on the weekend, like a Saturday. But I know when I was down there on Wednesdays, he was leaving and I was coming. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. He worked out. I do know he worked out a lot with Damon Caro and Chad Stahelski, who now
mhm,
does all the John Wick movies, right?
yeah.
And Tsuyoshi Abe, and trying to think. I don't know if it was Eric Paulson so much, but I do know that Chad and Damon and Tsuyoshi, um, maybe Yori
Uh,
Nakamura a little
yeah,
bit. They had a much more working relationship, you know.
yeah.
So
I can imagine him being, Bruce Lee's like the greatest, and to have that kind of pressure, it would be one thing if Bruce was still alive, but
mhm.
everybody, it's kind of like after Bruce's passing, everybody turns to the son and says, "Okay, you know."
But this,
Let's see
yeah,
what you got.
yeah. But this is why I say I'm happy because he was very much his own person,
Yeah.
and didn't go down that path from what I know in the film industry and things like that. He curved his own path in the same way that Bruce. Yeah, of course, he was Bruce Lee's son. You know, he's talked about that, and in the beginnings it might have caused him problems, but he was very proud of it. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, absolutely. You know,
Had a lot of pressure. Yeah,
yeah,
I remember there was an interview where he did make the kind of the different the comparison. He said my dad, Bruce Lee, or he said the martial arts was his life,
yeah,
and he loved acting and acting, but acting was a job. And he
yeah,
says for me, movies are my life.
yeah,
And martial
yeah,
arts is something I love, but it's a job. Something along those lines, it was
yeah, yeah,
obviously integral, but not quite the same emphasis as
yeah.
Bruce had.
Yeah, I again, I think what it was is that Bruce was a martial artist first
Mhm.
and an actor second,
Yeah,
right? And Brandon was an actor first and a martial artist second.
yeah,
So yeah.
I see.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Oh, and so that was a little rabbit trail, but I wanted to ask you about Brandon just because I don't think I've ever asked you before, and I'm
Mhm.
sure people find it interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, so you at some point you got into teaching on your outside of just your training at Dan's and
Hmm.
the various places. What was the timeline
Yeah.
for that?
Um, well, again, because I traveled and assisted Dan for a number of years on seminars and at the school, that people started asking me to start teaching, be it private lessons.
Mm,
Um, and the work that I did with Dan laid the groundwork for when I kind of embarked on my own career path, if you will. So, some of the places that would have Dan in once a year asked me to go in between those times and work with them, and so it began like that, and again because of the books that Tim and I had done. So it was back in the early 80s that I started doing more of that. And it was in 86, 85, maybe 85, somewhere between 85 and 86, where again I embarked on my solo career, if you will, and moved on to my own path, which I felt was necessary.
mhm.
At the time, the timing was right for it. So you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's amazing. And it's funny because I feel like I've been around so long,
Hmm.
and I started in 1990, and it's
Hmm.
like, I thought Dennis started in the 80s. I didn't realize he was in the 70s, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I was like, I have to, every once in a while people make a mistake when you're teaching an event or whatever, but for a short time I was teaching at a YMCA. Honestly, I was doing it as a favor.
Hmm.
And I looked at, and I didn't know what they had posted, and I finally found one of the papers sitting on the wall, and it said Jeremy Lynch is a first generation Bruce Lee student. And I was like, I said, okay, I was born in 1972. Bruce Lee
Right,
passed away in 1973.
right.
So if I am, I don't remember.
You were a very talented student.
I was.
Wow.
Yeah,
Mozart of martial arts.
that's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I had to go and correct that. It's
yeah,
like last thing you want to is people thinking that you're trying to spread that kind of nonsense about yourself too. It's like,
yeah. I run into a similar thing in the fact that, um, you know, I was the last person, and I've said it that way, and I've written it that way. I was the last person accepted into Dan's backyard group during Bruce Lee's lifetime. Like I said, he died 6 weeks after.
mhm,
And the number of times through the years people are saying, well, you were a Bruce Lee student, and I have to say no, I never met the man.
mhm,
The people can read into things whatever they want, right? But the
mhm,
point was, that was the statement, was that was my thing is when people wrote articles about me, I was the last person invited. We did actually open a second class for young people because I knew friends of mine, like well, now they're friends of mine, Mark Martello, and his brother Matt Martello, and some other people joined. So the class expanded before we moved over to the Filipino Kali Academy. But like I said, that was it. Is it was just there. So then I have to, no, people go, well, did you meet Bruce Lee? No, I did not. What I do like to say is the fact that because of the time in which I joined, everything was so fresh in everybody's mind between Dan, so I had Dan, I had Bob Bremer, Daniel Lee, Richard Bastillo, all of these guys who had met and trained with Bruce
Yes.
were my big brothers by Chinese tradition, and they were my seniors. And then knowing Linda, that I felt that I got a very clear picture, or a much clearer picture of Bruce Lee. I never deified him. I never, held him up on this massive pedestal or anything. I had massive respect for him. He was an amazing benchmark. But because of, again, knowing people like Bob and, and hearing stories and Linda and, yeah, we have Bruce throwing a bed frame through a wall and things like that. There was never any deification for him. And while he was, uh, for want of a better term, genius level in this aspect, and in his normal life, he had frailties, he had doubts and things like that. So that I think is one of the things that I'm happy because of the time when I was there, and it was a magical time, and it was a different time. Dan was much more of a coach. That's how he used to dress. Those pictures you see of him in that Karate Illustrated magazine, that's how he dressed when he taught class. Uh, so yeah, so like I said, it was a different time, but I've had my clock cleaned by Bremer, by old Daniel Lee, by Richard Bastillo. One of my proclamations is that I've had my clock cleaned by the best of them. It's it's just yeah. Um, yep.
See this one right here?
Yeah.
This
Oh,
is
that's Bremer. See this
Yeah,
one right
yeah.
here? That's Daniel Lee.
Yeah, that's right. Bremer's the one who taught me never to say you're sorry when you're sparring,
yeah.
because I came up, like I said, through a different time. Because I had orthodontal work, I used to turn my head when I sparred, and Bob was like, well, Daniel Lee's the one, Bastillo's the one who taught me not to turn your head, because he would keep saying, Chris, don't turn your head, and then he hit me, and then Chris, don't turn your head, and he hit me, and then he just pasted me. And so I told you not to turn your damn head. But Bob was the one, I was sparring and one time, and I tagged him with a shot, as happens. So as soon as I tagged him with a shot, he's my senior, I went, oh, sorry. And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, he's like pasted me with like two shots right back, just boom. I was like, oh. So I was like, okay. So Bob says, don't say. And then he was kind of like, no, you say it afterwards if need be, but not when you're sparring, things like that. So yeah.
I've had to remind people in my class a few times because sometimes it comes from niceness, and other times it can come off as an arrogance. Every time you hit somebody, oh, I'm so sorry, and it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah,
is what we're doing. Stop
yeah.
apologizing.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I didn't make it a habit, but because of my background, and it was almost like bang, bang. It was like one of those kind of things. Bang, bang. Oh, sorry. And that was immediately football, getting hit back. So I was like, okay,
Yep.
now I
was,
understand. I
I was
understand how things work. Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up too, because I was just going to ask you about. I realized that Bob's in the pictures in Dan's backyard and
Uh,
things like that. So I was going to ask you about your interaction with him.
well, again, he was a great guy. He was one of the senior guys there, and for a while, his son named Bill?
Yeah.
But his son used to come and train there
Yeah.
off and on for a while. and so I met him, and and I found out that Bob was a phenomenal trampolinist, and
Mm.
that he's the one who actually gave Bruce that trampoline, and he told me about how when he was training, showing Bruce how to do stuff on it, and then what Bruce did, and he's like,
Yeah.
oh, this kind of stuff. But again, they were Bob is known as like one of the fighters of the group or whatever, for want of a
Yeah.
better term. Um, they were all they all had um, just an amazing sense of camaraderie, if you will, at that time. Daniel Lee, good God, Richard Bastella, yeah. I mean, you're going to get hit, but there was never any animosity. There was
Mm.
never any things like that.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. It was just a great group of guys who all loved what they were doing. I think that was the prime thing. You know, I've said before that I wasn't at the Chinatown school, and as I said, I didn't meet Bruce. But um, when I began my JKD journey with them, that there was a Bruce created a really strong gravitational field which pulled all of these guys together and held them
Right.
together,
Wow.
and that stayed for a period of time. And then for whatever reasons, life gets in the way, things happen, and that kind of wavered or waned a little bit like that. But at those first few years, there were again, it was a very, very strong gravitational field,
Mm.
and they disagreed on stuff too. And the cool thing was is you could disagree on things. This guy had this way of doing it. This guy had that way of doing it.
Mhm.
All right, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's cool. You know?
Experimentation. I don't know,
Yeah.
Dennis. I speaking of Bob being a fighter, I think Dennis, was it at his memorial service? Linda mentioned that. She said Bruce liked Bob because he was a fighter. Do you remember that? I think that was
Yeah.
his memorial service
Yeah.
here in Redlands in Mentone area. I think is where we
Yeah.
did it, and it was nice to hear that. Because
Mhm.
we heard it. We sort of heard it internally. But he's
Mhm.
kind of part of
Right.
our group, and you never know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know. You've probably heard every story, with Bob, and I always like to imitate Bob because, he would always hold his belly, and he'd
Yeah.
always go, "Oh, God damn, Chris." And
Yeah.
one time we were talking, and he says, "So we're putting on the armor," and Bruce tells me, "Hurt him through the armor." And I go, "Well, God damn, Bruce. I mean, really? We're training." And Bruce says, "Yeah, but if you can hurt them through the armor, imagine when they don't have the armor on." So, and it just, that's the way I remember how he would talk about stuff later on. So, you know, just, but he,
Do you
he
remember,
always,
Chris? Who's the biggest joker?
who's the biggest joker?
Was
Wow.
that either Pete or was it Jerry?
Um, it's hard.
Or
No,
both.
Pete was almost the quiet. I would call him the quiet man of Jeet Kune Do
Yeah.
because he was there and not there. Jerry, I was very close to Jerry when we opened the Collie Academy. We only had the one unit, and Dan would teach. So I used to go and assist Jerry in teaching, and then when we expanded to the two units, um, Richard would teach in one side of the units, and then Jerry would teach in the other unit. Then we eventually knocked that wall down, so it
Mm.
was the huge place. But I used to assist Jerry a lot. I used to go out and spend Sundays at his house, not every Sunday, but um, uh, I'd go out there, with my wife and girlfriend at the time, and Dan would go out with his wife Sue, and Jerry was married to Rosalie at the time, and Jerry would be making all of this equipment, all of the sticks and all the different stuff,
Mm.
and he made me a special doorway Wing Chun dummy, but we would be discussing JKD for like hours over there.
Mm.
So I would say Jerry was the cynic, and but
Mm,
the only reason I say that is
I
he
get
was
that.
always questioning.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, he was always
Yeah.
questioning things with the right, but so it's really hard to say who was the Joker of them,
Yeah. I just
because they
always
were all,
wondered because there's always one in a group, and I'm just
yeah, yeah. Like I said, it's again, Daniel Lee was another guy who was like really quiet till you put the gloves on,
mm.
and
Yeah.
then it was good night, Irene, it's like stuff
Did
like
you
that.
did what about Bob? Did you think of him as a Joker?
Uh, yeah, yeah. He just had Bob he had a great sense of humor. Yeah.
Mhm.
So like I said, when you be doing stuff and and then his interaction as you know later on even more in depth with Tim, once they started that group. But yeah, he did have like I said, a sense of humor and just the way he talked. Like I said, I remember him telling me about setting up the trampoline for Bruce, right? That's what I was saying. And then uh showing him some stuff, and he says Bruce gets up on this trampoline and does a sit drop, a knee drop, and he goes, I think I'm ready for the flip now. And he goes boing, and he takes off, and Bob says, I'm going, no, because I'm scared, because if he hurts it, he goes, because if he hurts himself, he's gonna kick my ass. Right. So he goes and he just did this perfect flip and things like that. So um, there, like it's honestly, guys, it was such a different time. Um, we would have parties on weekends at Dan's house sometimes. Sometimes they would go to Richard's house. Um, Whatever, where Tim would come, Bob would come, Daniel Lee, all these guys and their spouses, their girlfriends, or maybe just by themselves. You go to Dan's house and you'd barbecue outside, and they'd make some food inside, and you'd be there for hours just talking martial arts.
Mm.
We used to call them JKD widows, right? Because
Wow.
they were always doing their thing, but he'd be outside talking martial arts and doing stuff and showing stuff, and Dan would be pulling stuff out of his file cabinet. And then oftentimes or numerous times it'd be like 2 o'clock in the morning, and Dan would just go, well, hey, I'm gonna go to bed now. Anybody who wants to sleep here, just sleep. So he'd just crash on the couches on the floor, and then you get up in the morning, and guess what? You talk about martial arts again. So so yeah.
Yeah,
So
Uh,
just
that's
did
great.
you ever hear the story that Bob told about when he was writing Fong on
Bong.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
yeah
And Bruce was getting more and more ticked off. Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
yeah
I think Dennis, yeah, you'd have to give for the jokester would probably go to Bob, and the humor man. Yeah,
Okay. I got
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Dennis, for the listeners that haven't heard that story, what you want to tell it really quickly? The Fong story.
No. Tell them to subscribe to. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I don't know how it goes exactly now. They've
Okay.
been told so many times.
Do you want me to tell it?
Yeah,
Okay.
try it. If you get
So
it wrong, we'll let you know.
yeah, yeah, you correct. So Bob said that Bruce used to make a sound effect, and the funny thing is, Ireland, I found out they have in the past also they would use the term "fong" for hitting somebody. I'll give you a good fong, and but I guess Bruce would make that sound when he would say "fong," and Bob, being a humorous guy, I thought it was kind of funny, so he goes on the blackboard. I think this was the Chinatown school.
Yeah.
I guess there was a blackboard, and he would write Fong and question mark, and he's training with Jerry Poteet, and he's back there and they're training, and he turns around and looks at the board and it's gone, and so he goes back. What the hell? He says Fong. He writes it back Fong question mark, and then he runs back. It's training, and like the third or fourth time, the same thing happens, and finally he's like, he just looks up and it's gone again, and he turns to Jerry and he says he writes it again and he says, "Hey, who keeps erasing it?" And he goes, "It's Bruce," and he's mad as hell. And he turns around, Bruce is there, like, put it fog on the board. I'm gonna kill him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And,
That's
and Jerry says, I'm gonna tell him. And Bob says, I'll kill you.
Mm.
Don't
Yeah.
tell him.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that was his jokester.
yeah.
So let me ask you this, Chris. What's going on with you? You and Kaz are doing the Titan series still?
Yeah, we just did one a couple of months ago down in Florida, and the way it actually started out was we did them, and I think, and you guys came down. I know Tim came down. Um, we did. He was doing. We did a couple of camps at Cass's school. You know, like 3 or 4 days
Mhm.
camps, and s- then we hadn't done it in years, and then everything happened, and then we were, but they were so enjoyable, and we had such fun, and people really enjoyed them. So then I think it was Dwight Woods who set it up for us to go and do the first one in Miami, and he used that term, you know, Titans of JKD, whatever, and okay, if that's what you call it, that's fine. So Cass and I hadn't worked together in probably like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And so we went out there, and it was just like, you know, we hadn't missed each other for a week.
Oh.
And it was great, and shared with people. Again, differing viewpoints, if you will, on certain
Yeah,
things,
that's
and,
what I was
and
going to ask you about.
ideas. Yeah, which is what to me is the most integral part, you know, in what we do. We're not a bunch of chicklets that all sit in a box and look identical, and we have to have the same
Right.
thoughts about everything. And so Cass has his opinions and training methods that he uses, and ideas, and I have mine. And so we come together and we share. And you know, when I do a seminar, be it with Cass or when I do my own seminar, one of the first things I always say to people is, "Hey, look, this is I'm going to just share ideas with you, training methods. I don't ask you to agree with me. I don't ask you to disagree with me. I don't ask you to think the same way I do. All I ask you to do is think for
Mhm.
yourself, and take a, you know, again, if I can get, for me to do a seminar is, I mean, I learned from years ago that if you ever want people not to get anything, then you flood them.
Mhm.
I actually learned that from Dan, you
Yeah,
know.
he told me the same thing.
Yeah, because they'll go into brain fade, and
Right.
so for me, it's always been a thing about what can I give them. You know, I like to have a theme for what I'm doing, a spine, if you will, from which I work.
Great.
And the participants don't know it. I need to know it just because of what I'm doing, and then I can go off it from there. But for me, it's the thing is, if I can give you material that you can take as a martial artist, as a JKD practitioner, to make what you do better, then I've done my job.
Okay, well, we're gonna stop it right here.
Just
Dennis had to run, and I had to change shirts all of a sudden. This was too good to edit away. And so yeah, what do you think? You got
a
to hear it.
great,
You got to listen in on a lot of it.
a great interview so far, and yeah, we're not gonna stop something that good. So there
Yeah.
will be more.
There's more, and yes, Vince is gonna be sneaking his way into the end of this here. And this is Vince Wepner, one of our JKD instructors, and acting as our technical consultant and engineer. What would you say? But yeah, Seafood Dennis Blue is elsewhere at this moment. So we just wanted to let you know what's going on. So enjoy as the second episode should be up shortly, and have a fantastic one.
Till next time.